Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us here today to another one of our web meetups. And the topic today is various issues that have arisen during the crisis and the pandemic that have to do in one way or another with free speech. And you could see this from different points of view. You could see it either from this kind of group thinking element that we see in society that was there anyway, and these days has become more powerful. So we've seen, let's say, unorthodox thinkers or doctors even that fall outside of the popular narrative about the pandemic, even being ridiculed or being their videos taken down from YouTube, or actually being considered kind of antisocial and irresponsible and all that stuff. But also we've had cases of people, and specifically some so-called conspiracy theorists or actual conspiracy theorists, who also had seen their videos being removed from YouTube. And there have also been discussions that, as far as I know, they haven't materialized yet, at least in any of the countries that I know of, about a control in information and basically filtering, quote, fake news about the virus. So we'll discuss all these things today with Joanna Williams. Joanna is an author, and she has written many books. The latest and perhaps the most famous one is Women versus Feminism: Why We All Need Liberation from the Gender Wars. And Joanna is also writing for Spiked, and she's also the director of, and the founder, I think, of the think tank KIO. And I will put a link on the chat because the work they're doing is very interesting, and I would invite people to have a look. And the second speaker is our very own Razi Ginzberg. Razi is the founder and the director of Ayn Rand Center UK. He is behind all these very good debates that we've been having, and he is the reason we kind of keep this debate going. And I would also say that we keep our intellectual sanity in these times of crisis. And you can see these debates in Ayn Rand Center UK channel in YouTube, to which I will also link on the chat. So let's start with Joanna. So both speakers are gonna have some introductory remarks, and then we can go to the Q&A. Again, you can raise your hand. You go to participants, and then you raise your hand. You see a button there, or you can write a comment in the chat, and I will pick it up and I will ask the speaker. So, Joanna.
Okay, thanks, Nikos. To begin by stating something blindingly obvious, we are in an historically unprecedented situation at the moment. There's no blueprint for how we should be responding to coronavirus. Sometimes you think there might be, given the similarities with the way different countries around the world have embarked upon lockdown, for example, and have employed similar methods to trying to get a grip on the virus. But it seems to be that there are essentially two things going on. There's a biological, medical emergency, the virus, which poses a threat to people's lives, a threat to people's health. Obviously, it's something that needs to be taken incredibly seriously. But then you've also got a social and political response to that medical emergency. We've got the way that governments around the world have chosen to respond to this social and political, to this medical, this biological problem of this virus. And the point I'm trying to make about there being no blueprint and about this situation being unprecedented is I don't think there is just one course of action that we could take. There are various different courses of action that we could take, as we see in some countries around the world. I mean, Sweden being the classic example, but Taiwan, Germany, Singapore, you can see different countries, some different countries have adopted slightly different strategies. And at this point in time, it's far too early to say, well, we've got it right, you've got it wrong. Only time will tell whether some countries have handled this situation better. So it seems to me that because this is so historically and, let's be honest, biologically unprecedented, there seems to be very little actual consent about the science around coronavirus. Each day it seems as if there are new facts coming to light about the virus. So even just in the newspaper yesterday, you might have seen it was announced that Swiss scientists are now saying that for children under the age of 10 who show no symptoms of coronavirus, they can't actually transmit it to each other or to family members. And of course, that was one of the major concerns and one of the major reasons why schools were shut down, was because it was this idea that even if children weren't dying from the virus, even if children weren't getting ill or even displaying any symptoms, that they could be these kind of invisible carriers. But there was no consensus about that, and these things are still up for debate and still up for discussion. And I think because there's no scientific consensus on so much, I think it's really important that we keep our social and political response open for public debate. In fact, I'd go further and I'd say even if there was a scientific consensus, even if there was 100% scientific certainty about coronavirus, I would still argue that we need to have the fullest possible public debate, because science, however brilliant it is, and God knows we need as much science as possible right now, science simply cannot tell us the correct way to be responding to coronavirus. These are social, political, moral, values-laden decisions that we're all being expected to make, and governments are making on our behalf. I think the virus is unprecedented. I think the lockdown situation that we're in now is an unprecedented attack, essentially, on our civil liberties, on our rights. It's hard to imagine any other time where governments have had so much control over what we can and can't do. So for all these reasons, I think keeping free speech, keeping open debate around coronavirus and how we respond to it has got to be an absolute fundamental right at the moment. We've got to have the fullest, the frankest, the freest discussions about what's going on. So that's my starting point. Just to say very briefly what happened to me last week, which was that I wrote an article for The Telegraph arguing that schools should reopen as soon as possible, arguing that teachers and the heads of teaching unions shouldn't just defer to the science, kind of capital T, capital S, and say the science will tell us when schools should reopen, because science can never answer that question. Teachers' unions, the leaders of teachers' unions had made some grand statements, now echoed today by Rebecca Long-Bailey, that schools shouldn't open until the science tells us it is safe for them to do so. Well, the logic of that is that either schools may never open. I mean, there may never seriously come a point where the science says it is 100% safe for schools to reopen, or more likely you're waiting for a vaccine to emerge. Well, that could be 18 months. So in my article, I was questioning the logic of keeping schools closed for an 18-month period and looking step by step through all the disadvantages and all the downsides of this. So I put it back to teachers that this was a moral and a political decision, and actually teachers needed to show some courage and reopen schools and get children back into the classroom. This did not go down very well, it's fair to say. This offended an awful lot of people. I have to say, and this is just my personal view, that it offended an awful lot of people who hadn't read the article because it was behind a paywall, but had read the headline, and the headline said, teachers need to show some courage and get back into the classroom. And teachers took that, and perhaps understandably, perhaps it was a badly worded headline and a badly worded tweet of mine, but teachers interpreted this as me saying that they were cowardly. I took it very personally, very individually, and assumed that I'd been saying that they were all cowards, essentially, and just needed to toughen out. And also displayed a huge element of fear. And what came across strongly from lots of the tweets and lots of the emails that people sent me was this assumption that within 5 minutes of entering the classroom, they would have coronavirus. They would be dead by the end of the day. And a week later, all their friends and family members would also be dead. I mean, I'm kind of saying that with a smile, but I don't want to trivialize. Clearly, there was a great deal of fear, and so people felt very insulted by what I'd said. Now, I would not want to say that anybody who replied, either emailed me or joined in the kind of Twitter storm that surrounded this event then wouldn't have been allowed to say what they did. You know, people who said they hoped I'd get cancer, that I was a cunt, that they hoped I would die, that they wanted to make me feel pain. You know, I would go to the wall to defend their right to be able to say that. And I think that's absolutely their free speech rights, to be able to hurl those insults at me and, you know, bring it on. You know, tough, I'm a big girl, you know, you take that on the chin. I think there were a number of problems with the response, though, and the kind of Twitter sensation, where it does slightly begin to tip over into a censorious situation. The logic of the pylon and where do you go with the pylon, apart from just hurling insults? Well, two different directions. There was a call for people to boycott the Telegraph, and there was also a call for a petition to be made to IPSO, the press regulation body, to complain about this article that I've written. So by appealing to the Press Regulation Commission, IPSO, or I can't remember what the acronym stands for, then I think you run the risk of the kind of mob outrage calling for more formal types of censorship. But more broadly, I think when you get such an overwhelmingly negative response like that, and a sheer volume of response, I think the danger is that other people, I like to hope, maybe one or two people out there who perhaps agreed slightly with what I was saying or thought I maybe had half a point. The problem is, I think their right to free speech, their right to hurl insults at me en masse, has the effect of chilling debate, of making the person who's thinking, well, I think she might have a little bit of a point there, more reluctant to stick their head above the parapet. I recognise I'm in a very privileged position of earning money through journalism. I think if I was the classroom teacher I think there's you know, I might have a bit of a point. I'd be very reluctant to stick my head above the parapet and say that, the fear of the backlash that this might prompt. One more then, just on the broader issue around free speech and coronavirus. I know there have been particular incidents with YouTube taking down David Icke and conspiracy theory videos. I think what alarmed me even more than YouTube doing that, was reports that Facebook were removing press coverage of protests in the US. And we know that in various US states, protesters have been gathering, lots of people calling them idiots, you know, saying they shouldn't have been protesting. But rightly or wrongly, whatever we think, this was something that did actually happen in the world, and has been reported on across various news stations. I mean, has even been reported on by the BBC, with the kind of interesting proviso that these were right-wing protesters, that these were all Trump supporters. Lots of them were from the pro-gun lobby, apparently. How the reporters knew this, I don't know, but this was the kind of BBC's line on it. And Facebook's removing even reporting of these protests is one thing that I've certainly heard. So I think obviously this brings in the role then of social media, the very contentious role of YouTube, of social media. Do they have the right? Is it an infringement upon free speech? So I'm guessing the argument is that as private companies, YouTube has the right to say, we do not want this video on our channel, so we reserve the right to kick this off. Now, I do think this is censorship. You know, I recognise YouTube is not the government. Clearly, YouTube's not the government. Facebook's not the government. But I still think that this is censorship. I think, you know, fundamentally, anybody who's free speech will make the point that sunlight is the best disinfectant, that having these arguments out in the open, that holding them up to exposure, showing people that protests are going on, showing people that some people think 5G is responsible, letting other people then knock that down and say, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. It stops these wacky ideas from being driven underground. It lets them get out there in the open. But there's also the argument that social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube have kind of become a form of public square in the 21st century. And I think that is an important point. And I think you can look at private space like my house, and you can look at a private space like YouTube, and you can see one, to me, very, very fundamental difference between the two. I have a key to my house, and only people who I know and trust, my family members and one or two neighbours, also have a key to my house. I don't go around giving keys to my house out. I don't go around saying anyone can come into my house who wants to and just start up having a conversation with me at any time. But the express purpose of social media, of YouTube, is precisely that. It's set up as a public forum to allow people to debate and discuss ideas. That's the express purpose. They're not saying this is a private meeting room only for certain people who we are inviting in. Their kind of blurb, if you like, their raison d'etre is to be a form of public forum for debate and discussion of all kinds of ideas. So what's happening then is they've set up this forum, and then after the event of people posting ideas, they're then taking it upon themselves, the people who run YouTube, Google, Facebook, to say, actually, we don't like these ideas. So they're judging, they're passing a values judgment, a political judgment on a certain set of ideas that they don't like, that they deem unsuitable for a hearing on their platform. And they're kicking those ideas off precisely because of the nature of the ideas of what's being said. And for that reason, I think it is a form of censorship. And I think it's something that at this point in time, more than any other point in time at all, we need to be really, really opposing, because like I say, if there was ever a time in this absolutely unprecedented historical situation we're living in, when there was a case for having as much full, free, frank and open discussion, it's now.
Thank you, Joanna. Yes, you mentioned the Telegraph article, and we can come back in the Q&A, but I have to say personally, I don't think I've seen something so creepy. I've seen a lot of Twitter mobs and stuff. I haven't seen something as creepy as the reaction to your article. So maybe interesting discussion later would be, is it that people are a bit extra nervous and a bit extra tribal these days? Or is this going to be the new normal? They say that, oh, the new normal is going to be the social distancing or whatever. Like, what if the new normal is that we become so hypersensitive to a different opinion that we come back with like horrible things? Like, because it was also the quantity. It was something like 2,000 plus comments, which again, I've never seen. But anyway, Razi.
Yeah, thanks, Nikos. And I agree. The attacks on Joanna, and we've seen this, anybody who voices a dissenting opinion at this time, and this was also true before, the sort of, there's a narrowing range of what people are allowed to say in the cultural sense without being considered beyond the pale. And dissent and free speech are obviously very much intertwined. If you're not able to voice a dissenting opinion, there is no free speech. So they're very much the same issue as long as you clearly define them. And I think, so I'm going to be focusing on, in my opening remarks, on a case where I think there wasn't a clear definition, or there isn't a clear definition of free speech. And that is the case of London Real and David Icke. So for anybody who doesn't know, London Real is a very successful YouTube channel. It interviewed conspiracy theorist and anti-Semite and all around disgusting human being, David Icke, several times, but one of those videos was removed from their channel. And they have, Brian Rose, the guy who runs London Real, has been claiming that he has been censored and his right to free speech has been violated. So since this is an Ayn Rand Center event and I am the director of the Ayn Rand Center, I want to start with a quote from Ayn Rand on free speech, and I'm sure you'll be surprised that I agree with it. This is from her column in the Los Angeles Times, The Fascist New Frontier. I think it's in 1962, but I'm not sure. So freedom of speech means freedom from interference, suppression, or punitive action by the government, and nothing else. It does not mean the right to demand the financial support or the material means to express your views at the expense of other men who may not wish to support you. Freedom of speech includes the freedom not to agree, not to listen, and not to support one's own antagonist. A right does not include the material implementation of that right by other men. It includes only the freedom to earn that implementation by one's own effort. Private citizens cannot use physical force or coercion. They cannot censor or suppress anyone's views or publications. Only the government can do so. And censorship is a concept that pertains only to governmental action. Now, if that definition is correct, Brian Rose obviously is not a victim of censorship. YouTube may have been right, they may have been wrong. You can agree or disagree with them, but they chose how they would allow him to use their platform, and they chose that video was not something that they wanted on it. And what's scary here is Brian Rose is basically demanding a right to somebody else's platform. And you don't see that you don't see him applying that to his own, because obviously London Real is a platform. It's a very successful platform. Am I being censored right now because I'm not being interviewed by Brian Rose? I mean, I it would be great publicity for us if we could get that kind of viewership. We have 308 subscribers on YouTube, so fewer people are going to see this than would have seen me on London Real. So by Brian Rose's standards, am I now being censored? And I think he wouldn't claim that because we have 308 subscribers compared to his, I don't know, I think it's in the millions. Not sure about that. And but so he's not going to apply that to himself. He will apply that to YouTube by demanding a right to their platform. Now, again, social media companies, this is not me expressing agreement with how they run their companies, but it's not my place to tell them how to run my companies any more than it's their place to tell me how to run mine. I think I can get into the whole issue of what I think specifically about London Real choosing to give their platform to somebody like David Icke, and I might do that in the Q&A if it comes up. But there is one thing that I do agree with Brian Rose on, and actually I agree with David Icke on this specific choice that they both made, and a choice that I've made as well, which is to be on YouTube. So I know a lot of what's going on with London Real and this current topic because I watch Brian Rose every day on YouTube talking about how he's being censored. And David Icke also has a YouTube channel, which is still there. It's still uploading videos, and nobody has removed it. So I agree with them. I'm making the same choice. I'm choosing to use YouTube, which is a free platform that does not owe me anything, and I'm grateful that it exists. And I think Brian Rose is as well, because obviously he would not have the success that he has at the moment without it. But I think this is not a free speech issue. Brian Rose is still expressing his views, and he's not being persecuted for them. That's my starting point, but I'm happy to be challenged on that.
Right. Yeah, I think it's worth pushing a bit the speakers on their point, so that also their disagreements become a bit clearer, and also to become clear until which point they would be willing to push them. So I will start with a question, but obviously if you want, just raise your hand, or you can write the question in the comments. So I would ask Joanna the first. So I have a question for Joanna and a question for Razi. So, okay, you say that basically YouTube deciding who has a say and who is not is something which is close to censorship, or you call it censorship. But then wouldn't it be also censorship if, for example, the state or these weird bureaucratic things that control how fair media are. I don't remember which one, what their exact names. But wouldn't it also be censorship if there was someone to say to YouTube or to Twitter or to whoever that, look, you have to have Alex Jones on your channel. You might not want Alex Jones. You might have deceived people by claiming that you are for free speech and all that stuff. But basically, you have to have them on, whether you want it or not. So wouldn't you say, or would you agree that this would be an actual form of censorship? Because you would have someone actually making someone express views that they don't want to be expressed. And to throw like the usual kind of cliche question, what if I don't know, George Monbiot demands an everyday column at Spike? Doesn't Spike have the right to say, no, go away?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just to put you up on something that you just said there right at the very, very end there, Nikos, you're saying, if somebody tells YouTube, you must let this person on your channel, and I'm making someone express a view, then I'm probably hitting you very badly there, but am I not making someone express a view? I think, I'm just being really pedantic. The word I picked you up on there is who is the someone in that situation? Because to me, there's a really, really important distinction between Spiked or Sky News or The Guardian and YouTube. And one is, that Spiked, The Guardian, they are publications where they have authors, they have an editorial line. Spiked isn't just a blank template. I mean, you could, if you want to look at two contrasting websites, you could look at Spiked and Medium, for example. So Medium is essentially a blogging site that allows anybody post up material. Spiked is not. Spiked has an editorial team, discussions and standards and specific line of argument, as does The Guardian. So, I don't have a Guardian column. I'm not sure I would even want a Guardian column, but let's say for sake of argument, I do want a Guardian column. Now, I'm completely, I feel hard done by. I don't feel as if I'm censored by The Guardian. I don't feel as if my free speech is impacted. I don't have the right to demand a Guardian column. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, they're not publishers. I mean, they're not, they don't have an editorial team. I mean, I couldn't tell you, what is Twitter view on, or I shouldn't be able to tell you, if their platform is you come and you post your material, your content on our site, then they are setting themselves up as not an editorializing, they don't have a kind of press arm where they're pumping out their own material. So I think it would be impossible to make YouTube be someone who expresses a view, because I don't think YouTube is someone, and I don't think you can make it would still be. So the point I'm making is it would still very, very clearly be, did you say Alex Jones? Alex Jones, it would still very clearly be Alex Jones's viewpoint. Nobody could possibly mistake it, or no, if they do try to mistake it, then they're wrong and they need to be put right. It's Alex Jones's viewpoint, which just so happens to be on YouTube. There can be, whereas if it's in The Guardian, people would assume that it was The Guardian's line. Very quickly, I just wanted to come back on Razi's definition, or not your definition, but the definition you gave, Ayn Rand's definition of censorship, that you said you agreed with. I think what's really interesting about that is the historical context in which it was written. If you can kind of use your historical imagination and cast your mind back to the time when Ayn Rand was writing, you're looking at a period of kind of McCarthyism, essentially, in the US and around the world, where governments would be leading the way in censorship. And I think what Ayn Rand was saying at that historical point in time, something very, very important, because the biggest threats to free speech at the time at which she was writing were coming from the government. So, I would completely agree with her at that point in time. I think, though, if you take a more nuanced historical understanding of the world and look at where we're at today, I don't think it's the case that in the UK today, biggest threats to free speech come from the government. And I think it would be very naive to think that the only form of censorship today comes from the government. The time Ayn Rand was writing, yeah, I get it, that was what she was responding to. The times have changed. She wasn't writing in the context of a very conformist academic elite, a very like-minded media elite that we have today. Social media hadn't been invented. It would be very unfair to expect Ayn Rand to have predicted all the developments that we have today. I think we have to be able to look at the historical and political context in which she was writing and the historical political context that we have today, and the threats to free speech are different in each era.
So I will get in a second to Richard, but for fairness, I have also to ask a difficult question to Razi, although I have to say I'm playing a devil's advocate with this question, but it's an important question. So Razi, okay, I get what you say that, yeah, maybe you don't have a right to YouTube and all that stuff. I get that. But we've seen people, and we've seen, for example, some leaders of the alt-right being denied their bank account, or being denied being kicked out of the gym. Or what if, let's say, we take it to the next step and the electricity company kind of denies them access to electricity. And someone was joking, one of the kind of populist right people were saying on Twitter, haha, so what do the freedom people now say? You can open your own bank? So what would you say to that? Wouldn't this be a form of unpersoning someone? So you deny him every form of possible service. And I mean, let's take it to the limit. Would you be on board with that? Or wouldn't you say that at some point there is something, some violation that should raise some concerns?
Yeah, I don't know how easy it is to open a bank, but I think it's pretty difficult. And a main reason for that is that it's a very heavily regulated industry, as are electricity and I don't remember what else you mentioned, but government is in everything. So but the solution to that is not to say, okay, government should then regulate more and make sure that each service provider provides services to anybody who wants it. The solution is less government, and then yes, you can open your own bank if somebody else doesn't want to do business with you. And I don't want to do business with alt-right people, so I would make the choice not to do business with them. And I think many would as well, and I think that's perfectly fine and better than what we have now. As for what Joanna said about the historical context in which Rand was writing, so the point I think Rand was making was that in principle, that there's a principle here that government cannot, should not, under any circumstances, prevent people from expressing their views or punish them for expressing their views. But having this freedom without property rights, which is essentially what we're talking about here with YouTube, is not actually possible fully. So YouTube, Joanna, you mentioned it doesn't have an editorial team like Spiked and The Guardian and Sky News, but it does have terms and conditions. It does tell people, this is what you can do on our platform, this is what you can't. Now, again, this is not me endorsing their terms and conditions, just like I'm not endorsing the Guardian's editorial view, but I absolutely support their right to have their own, to do with their property as they see fit. So, and in that sense, YouTube and The Guardian and the Ayn Rand Center are all the same. I will never have David Icke on our platform, as not just when we're at 308 subscribers on YouTube, but also if we're at 308 million. He is never welcome here, and that is going to be my choice. And we do want to have discussions on ideas with people of various views, but we also want to say, okay, we will make a decision on where we draw the line, and I think again, everybody should be allowed to do that with their property.
Right. So I will go to Richard, then I'll get to a very interesting discussion taking place in the chat, and then I'll go to Paul. So Richard, you are unmuted and you can ask your question.
Thanks very much, Nico. Yeah, so I'm afraid this is going to be directed quite squarely at Razi. I was just wondering, if YouTube took this video down, would you consider that censorship, or would you give that some other word? And this is not the entire question, by the way, but and would you just shrug your shoulders and go, "Ah, well, terms and conditions, nothing I can do about it"? I'm sure that that probably wouldn't be the case. I think one of the things that you're really missing, particularly with that quotation that you said you agreed with Ayn Rand, and I'm not entirely sure that I agree with Joanna that it's entirely. I mean, the whole McCarthyite period was not simply government censorship; it was film companies taking it upon themselves to clean out communists from the business in order to safeguard American values. So it is an informal form of what I fully consider to be censorship, and you have to step back and think, well, why would YouTube decide to, under its quotes terms and conditions, decide to take one thing off and not another? Now, there's many possible reasons for that. You could say, and this would be actually tracing it back to the state's involvement, you could say, well, what they're trying to do is ensure that there is no legal repercussions. And legal repercussions implies that there must be some law, i.e. something that has been determined by the government and by the state, that would mean that their company would be at risk. So you could argue that the terms and conditions themselves take into account some form of government censorship. But even if it didn't, even if it was just terms and conditions that they invented for themselves, you could not, I don't think, argue that then responding to some more general cultural atmosphere which says that certain ideas are beyond the pale. So it's too simplistic, to be polite, to say that it's all about the government deciding what we can and can't see. The other thing is, I think there's a slight kind of like, what are people debating if they're saying, well, you wouldn't just publish anyone on Spiked, or you wouldn't just publish anyone on Garden. We're not talking about that. If you went back to the printing press, right? If someone said, oh, I'm going to refuse to print your newspaper, and that became a thing where every printing company said, we're going to refuse to print your newspaper. I don't think it's as simple as going, well, I'll just go and set up my own print company and print my own. I mean, some people might do that, get the old, children's printing set out and produce their own things. And I know that, revolutionaries in the past have done that. But quite honestly, it's absurd to think that, that's not censorship. If a private company decides not to distribute or print your publication, it's clearly something which is, they are responding to a public mood which says, we don't want to be associated with this because our customers might go away. Now you might say, well, there shouldn't perhaps be a government intervention into that, although I'm not entirely sure. I think part of government's role is to protect the individual so that they can, if they want, get published or whatever. But it's clearly coming from somewhere that, and I guess what we need to think about is how to challenge that culture of censorship. But I don't think we're going to challenge it by simply sweeping under the carpet and saying, well, it's not really censorship, it's just a private company's decision.
So we're going to start with Razi, and then I'll go to Joanna, but also food for thought, maybe for people who, who consider themselves agreeing with Razi. If not censorship, what other term could be used for that? But let's hear from Razi first.
Yeah, so before the pandemic started and we took all our events online, we were gearing up to start weekly panel discussions that were going to be live in front of an audience. And we've done live events in the past with Joanna as well, and Nikos quite a few times. And I think they're fantastic events. And sometimes I look at ticket sales and I'm shocked by how low they are compared to, I don't understand what people are doing that's better than coming to our events. But that doesn't give me the right to go to people and say, how dare you, get wasted in the pub rather than spend your money on a ticket to an Ayn Rand Center event. I don't have a right to that, and I like I said, I'd be very I'm very disappointed whenever we don't sell out within minutes. And if YouTube decided to take down this video, I would also be very disappointed. But I would never claim that I have a right to their platform. If they decided to remove us completely, that would be, again, very, very disappointing. We are looking. We've already started doing quite a few events on YouTube. We're looking towards doing even more, and it would be not, it would be damaging to our plans. But that is, that is how it is. It's somebody else's private property, and I don't have a right to it, no matter how successful they are. It's not, their success does not give me a right to their property. One other point in there that I wanted to respond to was the idea of printing companies saying, okay, if you're outside, too far outside the mainstream or the Overton window, we are not going to print your newspaper or your book or whatever because we don't want to be associated with you. Well, that again goes back to the issue of private property, and that's not I'd say the Ayn Rand Center in many ways is in that group of people, that many would not want to be associated with. And before we started recording for YouTube, I mentioned to everybody on the chat, if you have a question to ask, keep in mind that you might face social repercussions if your face shows up on an Ayn Rand Center video, and people should consider that. But then there are also people who consider that and still choose to be here and choose to come to our live events and choose to express their support for what we do. And and we do business with the people who want to do business with us, and I think everybody that should apply to everybody, and it doesn't stop applying to anybody because they've reached a tremendous level of success.
By the way, Richard, something like that has happened. In my first ever event where I was a guest to speak in the Ayn Rand Center, we were actually kicked out of a pub. And so what happened is we ended up in a burger house, and I still delivered the speech. And we looked like this cult. It was like the Jesus and the students. And the talk was interrupted because like they were bringing the burgers and stuff. So it has happened to us. And what we thought was like, well, these people are losers, but it's their pub. They've kicked us out, and it was December. It was really cold. Otherwise, we'd do it outside. But anyway, so Joanna, any comments on this discussion? And then we'll get to Paul.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say I agree very much with the point that Richard's making around terms and conditions. And I think that's a very fair point to make, that you can place terms and conditions on your website that you would expect people to comply with. And those terms and conditions may tap into what's expected of the law in particular countries, or they may be seemingly random. There would be nothing to stop YouTube saying, actually, we've decided we don't want any videos that are over 20 minutes in length. And you could say, well, this is their platform. If that's it seems like a very arbitrary rule, but if they don't want any videos over 20 minutes, then fine, everybody will have to comply with that. Just like Twitter, I can't go on Twitter and kind of say, oh, well, I'm being censored because I want to make a tweet that's 300 characters, and it will only let me 180 characters, so it's censoring that final really crucial 2 words that I wanted to have on my tweet. That would be irrational. I understand when I sign up for Twitter, that these are rules, it's 280 characters. Like, say, if YouTube want an arbitrary limit, 20 minutes per video, they'd be well within their rights to be able to do so. But I think the crucial point is when they're going beyond that by introducing a political arbitrary rule, if you like, saying there are some political viewpoints that we consider beyond the pale. So your tweet is 180 characters, your video is the appropriate length, it's not showing child pornography or breaching any of the illegal things that we don't want, or breaching any of our terms and conditions. The sole factor is that we do not like the views that you are expressing. And as far as I'm concerned, at that point when they say you're compliant, your video's the right length, it's not showing any material that breaks the law or we consider to be in breach of our terms and conditions, the sole thing is we do not like the viewpoint that you're putting forward. To me, that's when it does become a question of censorship. And on the private property, I think for me, perhaps because I'm a bit older and a bit of a Luddite, I think one of the easiest ways that I can get my head around this is thinking of it in terms of the student union debate. So when students decide they want to no platform a speaker, is that censorship, or do we say, well, this is the private property of the university? These students are allowed to stop whatever speaker they want coming onto campus. Well, I think that, again, very interesting parallels. I completely disagree with the government, and this comes back to a point that you made earlier, Razi. I disagree with government legislation intended to compel free speech. No university should be forced to take a particular speaker. No student union should be made to invite, Richard Spencer or anybody if they don't want to. But I think that fundamentally misunderstands the nature of no platforming, and it fundamentally misunderstands the nature of a students' union. So students at the university have no choice about joining the student union. For the most part, they have no choice. You're automatically enrolled in the student union when you join. This is part and parcel of your student, your being a student is your enrollment in the student union. And for no platforming to occur, I'm probably saying something really obvious here, so I apologise to everybody in advance, but for no platforming to occur, a speaker has to have been invited. You can't no platform someone who's not been invited in the first place. So the very fact of inviting a speaker means you've got somebody who, even if it's just one student somewhere wants to hear, and wants to hear enough that they have invited them to their meeting. And it's after the invitation's been issued that other students have then decided, well, we think this is inappropriate. And so to my mind, that is censorship, because it's stopping the student who's also a member of the student union having their right to hear a speaker who they want to hear. Again, the terms and conditions have been complied with. They've done everything that they're supposed to do. And then after the event, on the grounds of the political views held by that speaker, they're then told, no, we're going to campaign and we're going to tell you, you should withdraw this invitation. And I think, to call anything other than censorship is actually just really naive.
Just want to make a brief point on that, Nikos.
Very brief, because I've promised Michael and then Paul.
Yeah, and by the way, we have also experienced the university no platforming. But this is another case where the problem is government. Government runs the universities or controls them when it doesn't actually run them. So the solution to that is privatizing the higher education and all education completely. And then different universities will have different policies, and I'm sure students would not be compelled to join a union in every university. And then I'm also sure in some universities, some speakers would not be welcome, and people will decide if they want to go to such a university.
Right. Let's go to Michael, because he has written something in the chat quite early, and then I go to Paul. So Michael asks a couple of questions, but the common thread between them is about the information that we get. So what if the government, for example, has some information about the virus and refuses to publish it? Or then he asks, is withholding information or distorting it maybe a bigger threat to free speech than access to media? So what about then having information and hiding it, or lying to people? So does this have anything to do with free speech? Joanna, have you got thoughts on that? So,
interesting question. I mean, how would we know? Basically, how would we know if the government is lying to us? So, I don't have a lab, unfortunately. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm never claimed to be. I sit like everybody else at home each evening, and you listen to this press conference and you hear Chris Whitty and all these scientific advisors. And partly I take it on trust in terms of what they're saying. But I don't just take it on trust. I also use my kind of critical faculties and read around and take part in debates like this and read from a very wide cross-section of media and watch lots of interesting videos on YouTube and read lots of posts from my various and wide-ranging friendship group on Facebook and read lots of comments on Twitter. And getting that variety of different opinions helps me think critically about the information that's put forward by government. And I think that's, you know, going right back to the beginning of this debate, to me, that's precisely why having free speech on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter right now is so important, because we can't know. You know, I think as kind of, unless you are a scientist who's been researching this for the past 10 years, I don't know whether Neil Ferguson's work is true or not, you know, is good quality or not. I'm not in a position to make that judgment. But when I've read 10 different commentaries on what he said and critiques of what he said, I feel as if I'm slightly more able to come up with a balanced view on what I think about what he said. So yeah, we can't know. We need the discussion.
Razi.
I just wanted to make a point before I get to that. Somebody in the chat says free speech means everybody having an equal right to be heard. That absolutely is not what free speech means. For you to have a right to be heard, somebody has to be compelled to listen. And nobody can be compelled to listen. That is a violation of their rights. So you do not have a right to somebody else's ear. And as for government withholding information or distorting information, again, that's all contextual. There are cases where I would definitely want government to withhold information if there's war and they're planning. I don't want them revealing that, because the enemy will also hear about it. If they're distorting information, that is dishonest and should not happen, and we should have means of punishing people who do that legally. I think that's it, but if I have anything else, I'll when you come back to me, I'll.
Paul, many thanks for your patience. Unmute yourself and talk.
I think maybe the harm principle needs restating in relationship to freedom of speech, because although not mentioned, that's the principle under which David Icke and the 5G conspiracy theories have been censored. And of course, those conspiracy theories have led to the damage of property. It could very easily lead to harm to people as well, to security guards, or you could imagine a situation where somebody's stupid statements leads to harm of other people. Although for me, the harm principle very rarely and only tangentially ever applies to speech itself. We must be allowed to say stupid things, as Trump did the other day. We must be allowed to say stupid things. So, but perhaps it needs clarifying, because this is a medical thing. I think it is slightly more mixed up than just having the BNP on the streets, and people would use the same harm argument about the BNP that you could see is really politics, not a real harm issue. Just to go back, this is still about the harm issue, but looking towards the future, how it might be used. And just because, Nikos, you mentioned George Monbiot writing for Spike at the start, it's well worth listening to the first 15 minutes of last week's Inside Science, which is all George Monbiot. And George Monbiot says, he's talking about like the freedom of flying and various freedoms. He said, governments have stepped in to ban things now in the interests of society and saving lives. And to quote him exactly the same formula applies to climate breakdown, i.e., you might have to ban flying to save lives, and he called for the permanent closure of the fossil fuel industry to save lives. So you can see the way that this kind of, or like I say, they haven't said it, harm principle is being used around the David Icke incident, which has led to damage to property. And the same harm issue is being used by Monbiot, which we knew it would be by the environmentalists, to take us into the censorious future. But maybe the harm principle needs a bit of clarity, because like I said, we must be allowed to say completely stupid things. I could only concoct a situation where the harm principle might apply to arresting somebody for what they say. You know, if I say we should kill Nikos, if there's no realistic prospect of that happening, then what I say just goes. It's only if there was some bizarre realistic scenario, you know, fascist rally in 1933 or something, where it would apply, in which you might be arrested for airing your opinion. But like I say, maybe it needs clarifying.
No, I think that's very important what you said, Paul, but this is also why sometimes we might sound in these circles and in this meetup a bit pedantic with how do we define terms, and why even you could say we're in the same barricades with Joanna, but it's very important to clarify exactly what is free speech, because when there is no clear definition, you can see then George Monbiot saying, if I don't take away basically your freedoms and return you to a society without planes, you are harming me. Or what do they say in the States? I have the right to life, and basically you driving your car denies. So sometimes people say, oh, come on, why do you spend so much time discussing what exactly is free speech, what exactly is individual right? It is important for various reasons, but one of the reasons is exactly what you said, that then you have people like Monbiot switching these terms, and because no one is big on definitions, very few people react. So I think that's very, very important point. So let's reverse now. Let's go first to Razi and then to Joanna.
Yeah. So Paul, you said he said something like government is banning things now to save lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, government, you know, whenever they violate rights, it's to save lives. It's never, you know, because you don't have a right to your life, and the you know, the philosopher kings should make all the decisions. They're always supposedly on our side when they're telling us what to do, and mostly what not to do. On the 5G conspiracy theories leading to people damaging property, I actually haven't looked into the conspiracy theories that much because it's not interesting to me. But if somebody listens to something that somebody says that 5G might do and then goes on to damage property, the person damaging the property is responsible. That is their choice, and you know, they what they do with it, unless David Icke himself goes and damages 5G towers, he's not responsible for what his followers do. So yeah, you know, in terms of his right to express his despicable views, I completely support that. I just support the right of people, other people, not to give him their platforms.
Joanna.
Yeah, very quickly, and apologies, Paul, I'm not sure if this will actually address directly what you're saying, or it's just instead what you prompted me to think about. I mean, I think there are so many great arguments for free speech, but one of the reasons why I'm particularly keen on free speech is because I think it assumes a certain degree of agency and a certain degree of rationality, not just in the speaker, but importantly in the people who are hearing as well. I mean, I can't remember, I'm sure there's a really famous quote around this that will come back to me as soon as we finish this evening. You know, the free speech is as much a right for the person who's speaking as it is important and a right for the people to hear different viewpoints. And I think this is particularly the case right now. You know, we need to be able to hear everything from the wacky to the outlandish, to, you know, and have that trust, that faith in people, that we are going to be able to exercise some sense of judgment. I mean, I know various press agencies in the US have no doubt searched incredibly hard to try and find American citizens that have been busy drinking bleach. But I think we can, you know, we should assume some form of intelligence and rationality and capacity for reason within individuals. And again, I think, you know, another reason why free speech is so important is because for every time Trump said, you know, bleach or disinfectant might make the virus go away, it also allowed other people to say this is the most bizarre and ridiculous and dangerous and stupid and irresponsible thing that's ever been suggested. I think the problem is at the moment with coronavirus, we are having that sense of people as having agency and being able to exercise their own judgments, we're having that taken away from us in the most fundamental way imaginable. I'm no longer, in theory, able to exercise judgment about how many times a day I go for a walk. I'm no longer able to exercise my own judgment about how close I should sit to a friend if we happen to be walking in the same place and come across a bench. You know, these decisions about our daily lives are being taken away from us on the assumption that we're incapable of exercising judgment and making these decisions for ourselves. And, you know, again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but the more free speech we have, the more we're saying we trust people to exercise some degree of agency and come to sensible conclusions themselves, to exercise judgment, which for me is an essential part of what makes us human.
Thank you, Joanna. So what we're going to do, we're going to aim in, and then we have some very interesting questions in the chat.
Can I very briefly reply to one comment in the chat? It was the one by Michael saying that everyone has a 5-minute spot. No one is compelled to listen. Where do you get that 5-minute spot? Is it in your house, Michael, or is it in somebody, you know, in a platform that somebody has built that is very successful? And who measures how successful you have to be for you to lose the right to decide what goes on your platform?
Because we're gonna get to Michael, because he asked another very interesting question. Let's go first to Eamon, and then Noy, and then Michael. Eamon.
I basically agree with everything that Razi said on a philosophical level. On a practical level, I want to just add a couple of things that I think complicate the situation. So we all know that that governments intervene in businesses in sort of unequal ways. So they will intervene to make sure that certain groups don't get discriminated against. For example, they might say to a particular company, say a supermarket, that they need to provide access to certain kind of people. So they might compel a bigger company to provide access for disabled people, for example. So, and then there's certain protected groups where if you say certain things, if you criticize them in a certain way, that might be regarded as hate speech. So maybe you would say that the government should. The solution to that is the government should not intervene in that way. But for people, and I think the thing that affects this conversation a bit more is that the government also comes to protect people different people with more or less enthusiasm. So if certain people are deplatformed, maybe you'd have less. You see less support in the public or in the government for that person. So it seems that the certain kinds of people are being deplatformed, and university administrators and governments don't seem to care, or don't seem to intervene, or don't seem to take any steps in order to stop it happening. So is it then, can you really blame people for wanting to use the instrument of government to protect themselves, because they see the government or the state or the system around them rigged in the favor of their opponents? So they want to come in and say, okay, fine, we'll use the instrument of government in order to make our voices heard.
Joanna, do you want to go first?
I don't have an awful lot to say to it. I mean, my view on what's going on in universities is it's not certain people that are being censored, but certain viewpoints. And I do think that's quite an important distinction to make in this era of identity politics. I also think that there is a close relationship between censorship that comes from government and censorship that comes from other forms, social media, universities. You know, personally, I mean, I think that been very clearly illustrated this evening. The point of disagreement between Razi and myself is that I'm describing all of these as censorship. Razi is making a distinction between the government as censorship and the others as private property rights. But you know, I think there is a very symbiotic relationship between the censorship that happens on social media and the government. And I think the government, you know, some people in government look and see what becomes accepted on social media. You know, I personally, I don't think there is any objective definition of a hate crime, for example. What is a hate crime is not the actual physical act of the crime, the nature of the crime that's committed. It's the thought processes and the speech acts that went alongside the crime. So these are not objective, these are subjective definitions. And I'm sure lots of these are tested out in universities on social media first. Obviously, you've got the prevent strategy that has a major impact upon what can be said and can't be said in universities. But I think also, even at the level of a university, there is a very close relationship between the management of the university and the student union. And I think the academic managing team, the senior management team of the university, don't like the bad publicity. They don't want to be seen as to be the ones getting their hands dirty and saying, no, this speaker cannot come onto campus. So they're quite happy to let the students make those decisions. And then people come out and say, well, it's not censorship because it was just the students. And meanwhile, the senior managers at the university are rubbing their hands in glee, thinking, yeah, that speaker that we didn't want to be here has been stopped, no longer on campus. We weren't the ones who had to. We can now take a step back. The university loves this, you know, the senior managers. We can take a step back. We can say, oh no, these terrible censorious students, you know, we think there should be free speech in our university. Meanwhile, yeah, we're quite glad that they were the ones that got their hands dirty. And other people will then leap to their defense and say, you know, this wasn't censorship at all.
Razi.
I completely agree with Joanna that there is a relationship between what goes on in things like social media and then government censorship. And we often use a modified version of the quote from Andrew Breitbart, who said, politics is downstream from culture and culture is downstream from philosophy. So I think the dominant philosophy and the culture is one that frowns upon dissent and in an increasing way, and yeah, the end result is things like hate speech laws and you know, their expansion and them being enforced in a more forceful way. So I agree on that. And to Eamon's point, can you blame people for looking to government for to protect speech? Well, yes and no. So yeah, you can definitely blame people. You should hold people accountable for their own decisions and their own opinions and actions. But also we go back to the issue of there is a cultural atmosphere that pretty much looks to the government for solutions to everything. And this is one thing that falls under the category of everything. So, but yeah, we in order to move away from that in the long run, we do need to make significant and more fundamental cultural changes to get people off their addiction to government as a solution to everything.
Thanks. So just to say, I'm muting the speakers once they speak, not as an authoritarian gesture, but because there's some echo. So there are two questions, and unless someone else has their hand raised, we end with them. First question, fascinating topic that Noi raises. So she asks, what is the point after which propaganda or words will start to worry us that they're going to need to action? So, for example, you have Nazi propaganda that they don't say, kill that specific Jew and I'll give the address and let's go to his home. But it's just propaganda that is dehumanizing this part of the population. And an example that came to my mind is from the Rwanda massacre. So if you read the history, there was this radio station controlled by the Hutus, and a lot of people attribute part of the fanaticism to the vitriolic messages that this radio station was literally 24 hours every day, was basically inviting the Hutus to go and eliminate the Tutsis. And again, they didn't say go to that specific house, and so it's difficult to point to a specific objective link between the radio and the act of a specific Hutu. But at the same time, isn't there a point where we say, you know what, this actually is creating an atmosphere for lynch mobs, for massacre, which might even end to genocide? So have we got a comment on that? Who wants to start? I'll start with Joanna.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting point, and I think I personally would draw the line quite narrowly at very specific threats, simply because if you try and censor a more general climate of hostility, even hostility that's really outrageously horrible and directed towards specific groups rather than specific individuals, I think, again, I'm kind of rehashing a general and very basic arguments about free speech here, but you don't make that argument go away. If you look at some of the propaganda in the Second World War that referred to the Japanese, really dehumanized Japanese people, for example, you don't make that go away by banning it or even by turning off the radio station. The danger is you drive it underground, and this is what I think with some of the conspiracy theories that are going on now. You actually make them illicit. You make people think there must be something in these ideas that are being said, and you prevent opportunities. I think most importantly of all, you prevent opportunities for other people to argue back against them and put forward another side of the story. I think clearly it's criminal to make specific threats against a person. I mean, that in and of itself is a crime. It's not a speech act, but saying derogatory things about groups and even kind of urging saying your hatred of groups is so intense that you would wish to see every member of that group dead. I think we have to have that kind of thing out in the open.
Razi.
Point about Nazi Germany. The reason the Nazis came to power was, again, because of a cultural atmosphere that made it possible, not the legal right for them to express their views. And, you can see in America, there are Nazis, and they, there's like, you can see you can look them up online. There's like a couple of hundreds of them, go into the woods and burning crosses and trying not to burn themselves and not always being successful. So, it's that's where American culture places them. And in Germany, the atmosphere was ripe for something like that. And there is this brilliant book by Dr. Leonard Peikoff, The Ominous Parallels. And in it, he actually says that America is on that path. And this was published 38 years ago. But he does go through the philosophical basis and in German philosophy for what eventually led to the rise of the Nazis. So again, it starts with ideas, and they spread through the culture, and eventually they get to politics. There's something that Joanna said in her opening remarks, I think, which I disagreed with but didn't address. But Fabian addressed it in the chat before he left.
You mean the top point about McCarthyism?
Yeah. And he asks, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says, to what extent was the McCarthyism, the quote McCarthyism, censorship by the government, and to what extent was it voluntary shunning of totalitarians by private people? We can have a whole discussion about McCarthy himself and whether the term McCarthyism, which was coined by the American Communist Party, which actually was operated by the Soviet Union, whether that is a valid term or a smear. But yeah, people again chose with whom they want to associate and with whom they didn't, and many people didn't want to associate with people who were working within America for the Soviet Union.
Right, but again, the term has kind of got the dynamic of its own. But as you said, that's another discussion. So the last question, and Michael had to leave, but he asked this question many times, and I think it is in a way the $1 million question. So this will be the last question that I'm going to ask both of you. What do we need free speech for? What is free speech for? Simple question. So if you can give your best answer, who wants to start? Let's start with Joanna.
Okay, I'm happy to kick off. I mean, free speech for me is essential for free thought. It's how we work out what we think, how we are able to relate free. It's the most fundamental right of all, because, like I say, it's related to our ability to think freely, to express ideas freely, to join in with other people who make connections with other people who are like-minded, or work out who disagrees with us. I mean, free speech is the fundamental basis for any kind of free society. And, you know, if we come right back to the topic of the debate today, why is free speech important right now? You know, we see government, and not just the government, but the way other people we've seen are very keen to kind of curtain twitch on their neighbours and report other people. You know, we see how precious our freedoms are, and really I think how easily freedoms that we take for granted can be removed from us. I mean, you know, if somebody had told me 6 months ago that this would be the situation that we live in today, I would have laughed. I would have thought they were describing the opening pages of some kind of dystopian novel. You know, I just would not have believed that this could possibly be true at all. And yet it is true, and it is where we find ourselves. And we need free speech so we can criticise what's happening, so we can challenge the different ideas and the restrictions that are placed upon us, so we can see whether our interpretation of what's going on is the same as other people's interpretation. So I think there's so many reasons why free speech is important generally, but even more important today. But before I finish that, something that you said at the beginning that I just wanted to come back on, because I did think it was a really interesting question that you raised, and it was something that I've been thinking about myself. And that was, you know, particularly in relation to the response to my Telegraph article, is the current climate, is it kind of different? Is it worse? Are people more hostile to different ideas now than at any other point? And I have to say, I think they are. And clearly all of us are aware of the debate around Brexit that surrounded the past few years. And I'm not going to ask, but I'm sure everybody here, you know, probably has a slightly different opinion on Brexit. That was clearly a very, very polarising political experience that we've all lived through over the course of the past 3 years. But I suddenly managed to maintain friendships, I'm pleased to say, with people who took an opposing side to me on the Brexit debate. I think the debate around the debate such as it is around coronavirus is not a patch on that. You know, this is an intensity of feeling and animosity to opposing points of view that is out of comparison to Brexit. You know, I almost look back on the Brexit debates quite fondly, because you think at least there were kind of logical arguments to be had, and you could disagree. And yeah, don't get me wrong, it sometimes got very passionate, very heated. You know, there were friendships made and broken. But there seemed to be an element of kind of rationality to it, underpinning most of it, which doesn't seem to be the case now. And I think the primary thing, it seems to me, that's underpinning now, you know, is fear, and fear of kind of a sense of conformity is almost all we've got. You know, obeying the rules is all we've got to keep us existentially safe. And the second you start questioning the rules, then what you're doing is you're threatening everybody's existential sense of security. So any kind of questioning of the rules, any questioning of the restrictions must be squashed as kind of thoroughly as possible, because it's presented as being an existential risk to kind of people's fundamental safety and security.
I totally agree. And you could say that fear is an excuse, like we can understand this, but at the same time, because this time the situation is really more crucial, even at Brexit, I could also say that I would expect from people a bit more clear and reasonable thinking, because the more crucial the situation, the more rational we have to be. But as you said, it's unfortunately, yeah, the Brexit period looks like an enlightened period of rationality now in retrospect. So Razi, final words, and what do we need free speech for?
First of all, I agree with, I think, everything Joanna just said, unless I missed something that I disagree with. But yeah, I agree with what you just said. I think the debate around Brexit was a low point at the time, and now it's something to strive to get back to, you know, on the way to hopefully civilized discourse at some point. Yeah, and I also agree about free speech. I actually don't have much to add. I think free speech is the freedom to think, because if you are afraid to express a view, you are also afraid of what goes on in your mind before expressing that view. And I like what Josh said in the chat. Free speech removes force in the exchange of ideas. You can express your view, and there's no chance of you being of force being used against you, unless an individual chooses to use force against you, and then they are violating the law. So yeah, that let's all keep working towards getting there.
Yeah, thanks. And a final thought from me is, remember where we were 5-6 weeks ago, or 6-7 weeks ago? No one was daring to speak. Everyone was afraid. And every day we would wait at 5 o'clock for our wise overlords to give us kind of the allowable opinion. And back then there were very, very few people who dared to stick their neck out. Some of these people were people like Joanna and the online magazines she writes for, and also people like Razi. That's why in my mind, kind of a turning point was the event we had with Brendan. Again, it's more than a month ago, and the title was something like "Is Tyranny Here?" And everyone was like, "Oh, come on, that's ridiculous." Yet, I think it was very important that some people dared to speak then. Now that we have the statistics, and now that we have a lot of doctors, it's very easy to say, well, you know, maybe we should question this. But when it was very, very difficult, some people did it. So that's why I'm encouraging people, you know, give your clicks and your time to Spike, to Joanna's think tank, Kio, and consider also helping Razi and the Ayn Rand Center. I will post a link where you can get involved and become a member. So thank you very much. I think this was a very good, very interesting discussion. Good to see that we can disagree with people, that we are together in the intellectual barricades. So I will post a link to Joanna's think tank. Again, it's called CEO. It's somewhere at the top of the chat, and now I'm posting it again. So soon you will be able to see this debate in YouTube, where we'll upload it. I've also uploaded the Ayn Rand Center's UK YouTube page. And many thanks to the speakers, and many thanks to the audience for their very good questions. So,
yeah, thanks everybody.